The security camera, a silent, unblinking cyclops mounted high in the steel rafters, saw everything. It saw the vast, dimly lit warehouse, a cathedral of consumerism where towering shelves formed canyons of cardboard boxes. It saw the forklifts, silent and dormant at this late hour. And it saw Mark Dillard, a man of average build in his high-visibility vest, moving with a purpose that was not his work. This was the perfect setup. The floor, recently mopped to a high-gloss sheen, reflected the sterile fluorescent lights above like a treacherous, still lake. A single, empty pallet was positioned near the end of an aisle, not quite where it should be. To any observer, it would look like a classic workplace hazard. But the camera, the digital witness, saw the truth. It saw Mark glance around, not for safety, but for an audience. Finding none, he took a deep, theatrical breath. This was the moment he would trade his physical dignity for a lifetime of financial freedom, or so he thought. He was about to become the star of his own tragic play, a performance of pain and deception designed to fool doctors, insurers, and his own employers. The air in the warehouse was cold, smelling of dust and diesel, but Mark felt a bead of sweat trace a path down his temple. This wasn't nerves. It was adrenaline. For weeks, he had planned this. He had studied the camera blind spots, learned the security guard's rounds, and even practiced the fall in his garage, ensuring it looked both devastating and believable. He thought of the mountain of debt he was buried under, the medical bills for a condition his insurance wouldn't cover, the lure of a tax-free workers' compensation payout that promised to wipe it all clean. In his mind, this wasn't fraud. It was a desperate solution, a secret loan from a faceless corporation. He positioned his body, his muscles coiled not for an accident, but for an act. He was ready to sell a lie, and the price was his integrity. He took a step towards the strategically placed pallet, his boot squeaking on the polished concrete. His body language shifted from a man walking to a man losing control. His arms flailed, not with the genuine panicked instinct of someone slipping, but with the calculated, almost balletic motion of a performer. He let out a sharp, guttural cry, "Ah!" that echoed faintly in the vast space. Then he fell. It was a cascade of controlled collapse. His legs went out from under him, his spine twisted, and he came down hard on his side, his shoulder and hip taking the brunt of the impact with a sickening thud that was louder, more dramatic than necessary. The moment he hit the ground, the real performance began. He didn't get up. He lay perfectly still for a count of 3, then let a low, continuous moan escape his lips. He clutched his lower back, his face contorted in a mask of agony he had rehearsed in the mirror. He was no longer Mark Dillard, warehouse worker. He was Mark Dillard, victim. If this story is touching you, comment below where you are watching from and what time it is there. Was it the pressure of modern life that pushed him to this brink? The feeling of being just one missed paycheck away from disaster? Or was it simply a greed, a belief that he could outsmart the system? Whatever the reason, in that moment on the cold floor, his fate was sealed. Not by the fall, but by the lie he was now living. And as he lay there, feigning unbearable pain, he had no idea that his entire future was already being recorded, frame by damning frame, by the silent, impartial eye in the rafters. The first act of his tragedy was over. The second act, the investigation, was about to begin, and it would be guided by the very evidence he thought he had circumvented. For a long moment, there was only the hum of the warehouse freezer units and Mark's own manufactured groans. Then, the sound of hurried footsteps. A coworker, Jerry, rounding the corner, his face a mask of alarm. "Mark! Oh man, don't move!" The performance was working. Mark squeezed his eyes shut, forcing out a tear of pain. My back!" he gasped, his voice a strained whisper. "I think something's broken." He made his body go rigid, then feigned a violent spasm. It was a performance of a lifetime, and Jerry was his first captivated audience. The ambulance was called. The paramedics, with their practiced efficiency, carefully log-rolled him onto a spine board. Mark cried out as they moved him, a sharp, convincing yelp that made one of the EMTs wince in sympathy. He was the picture of a man whose life had just been irrevocably broken by a moment of corporate negligence. The hospital was a blur of bright lights and concerned faces. Mark, now deep in his role, recited his symptoms with the precision of a studied script. "A sharp, electric pain shooting down my left leg," he described. "Numbness in my toes. I can't feel my toes." He winced as the ER doctor palpated his spine. He knew how to fake the reflexive jerk, the involuntary tightening of muscles. He submitted to the MRI, the X-rays, all the while knowing they would find nothing, because nothing was truly damaged. The system, designed to help the genuinely injured, began to churn into motion for him. He was given powerful painkillers, a neck brace, and a strict order of bed rest. Lying in that hospital bed, he felt a surge of triumph. The first hurdle was cleared. The incident was officially documented. The claim was inevitable. The following days were spent at home, in a carefully constructed prison of his own making. He practiced his limp, making sure it was consistent. He groaned when he stood up from the couch. He had his wife, Sarah, an unwitting accomplice to his deceit, help him with the simplest tasks, her face etched with a genuine worry that stung him with a guilt he quickly suppressed. The insurance adjuster called. Mark told his story again, his voice weak and strained over the phone. "I was just walking. The floor was wet. I don't even remember the fall, just the pain." He was a model claimant. He attended all his physical therapy appointments, where he exaggerated his weakness and limited range of motion, subtly ensuring he made just enough progress to not arouse suspicion, but never enough to be declared fit for work. The temporary disability checks began to arrive, direct deposits that felt like vindication. He was beating the system. But the performance was exhausting. The constant vigilance, the fear of being caught in a moment of unguarded normalcy, was a heavier burden than he had anticipated. He had to remember to limp when taking out the trash, to wince when bending to pet the dog. He started watching true crime shows about fraud, his heart hammering against his ribs, looking for the mistakes others had made. He became paranoid, seeing potential investigators in every unfamiliar car that passed his house. The lie was no longer just an act. It was a cage. The money, while a relief, was tainted. Every dollar spent carrying the faint metallic taste of his deception. He was living a performance, and the curtain was still up, with no sign of it ever coming down. The audience, his family, his doctors, the insurance company, was still watching, and so was something else. A digital spectator from the rafters, waiting for its moment to speak. Back at the corporate offices of the logistics company, a different kind of tension was brewing. The initial report of Mark's accident was processed with routine concern. The forms were filed. The insurance claim was initiated. But for Brenda, the regional loss prevention manager, a small, nagging alarm bell had been triggered. It was a series of minor inconsistencies, a scent of something off. The first was the location. The spill, reportedly from a leaking pipe, was in an area serviced weekly, and the maintenance log showed no recent work orders. The second was Mark himself. His personnel file showed a solid but unremarkable employee. No prior incidents, but a casual conversation with his direct supervisor revealed a recent pattern of disgruntlement, of comments about being underpaid for the risks he took. It wasn't proof, but it was a flicker of motive. Brenda was a woman in her 50s, with the sharp eyes of a hawk and a deep institutional mistrust of perfect accidents. She requested the security footage from the warehouse for the entire shift, not just the moment of the fall. As she waited for the IT department to compile the files, she dug deeper. She pulled the records of the security system, noting the locations and angles of every camera. She saw that the camera covering aisle 7, the scene of the accident, was fully operational. There were no blind spots where Mark had fallen. This directly contradicted his statement to the insurance adjuster, where he'd claimed, "It was a dim area. I don't think the cameras saw much." That was the third inconsistency. A genuine victim wouldn't be speculating about camera coverage. They'd be relying on it to confirm their story. The company's skepticism, hardened into a formal internal investigation. They hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Roy, whose specialty was insurance fraud. Roy's approach was methodical and psychological. He didn't just look at the incident, he looked at the man. He conducted discreet surveillance on Mark's home. And that's where the fourth and most damning inconsistency was captured. One afternoon, while supposedly bedridden with debilitating back pain, Roy's long-lens camera recorded Mark in his driveway, effortlessly lifting a heavy bag of gardening soil out of his car trunk. He wasn't limping. His face wasn't contorted in pain. He moved with the fluid, unthinking ease of a perfectly healthy man. Later that same day, Roy saw him through a window, playing an animated game of Wii Sports baseball with his son, twisting and swinging with a vigor that was medically impossible, according to the charts Brenda had provided. Brenda now had two parallel truths. The first was the paper truth. The medical reports, the disability claim, the story of a man broken by his job. The second was the visual truth. A man living a completely normal, active life the moment he believed he was unobserved. The gap between these two truths was the territory of fraud. She compiled her findings, the supervisor's testimony about Mark's discontent, the maintenance logs clearing the area of any hazard, the PI's photos and video, into a cold, hard dossier. This wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about principle. It was about the thousands of genuine claimants whose credibility was undermined by acts like this. With a steady hand, she forwarded the entire package to the company's legal department and the state's insurance fraud bureau. The net, woven from threads of suspicion and evidence, was now officially cast. Mark, at home counting his disability checks, was blissfully unaware that the walls of his carefully constructed lie were beginning to crack. The digital witness never sleeps. It doesn't blink, it doesn't forget, and it doesn't empathize. In a sterile, climate-controlled server room, the fate of Mark Dillard was stored as a series of ones and zeros on a hard drive. When Brenda, armed with the private investigator's damning photos, formally requested the full, high-resolution footage from the warehouse's CCTV system, the IT technician pulled the file with a few clicks. The timestamp was precise: 19:10:43 on the evening of the accident. What played out on the screen was not a tragedy, but a farce. The wide-angle lens captured the entire stage Mark had so carefully set. They saw him walk past the hazardous spill once, then double back. They saw him glance not at the floor, but directly up at the camera's location, his face a calculating mask. The footage had no sound, but his body was screaming his intent. The initial viewing was a silent, shocking tableau for Brenda and the company lawyer. They watched as Mark, with the deliberation of a stage actor hitting his mark, positioned himself next to the pallet. There was no slip. There was no loss of traction. There was only a conscious, controlled decision to collapse. His legs buckled in a way that defied physics, a deliberate folding rather than an uncontrolled fall. The flailing of his arms was too symmetrical, too theatrical. And then, the moment of impact. Instead of the jarring, chaotic thud of a real fall, his body seemed to place itself on the ground. It was a pantomime of pain, a chillingly accurate yet fundamentally false performance. The most damning part came seconds after he landed. Before the first groan, before the facade of agony fully locked into place, there was a single, fleeting moment. His eyes, for a fraction of a second, darted back towards the camera. It was a look of pure, unadulterated assessment. Did it work? Was the performance convincing? In that one look, his entire consciousness of guilt was captured in high definition. This was the linchpin. The private investigator's footage showed a man lying about his recovery, but the CCTV footage showed a man manufacturing the entire incident from scratch. It was the difference between a lie and a conspiracy. The company's legal team made copies, created time-stamped excerpts, and had a video forensic expert prepare a statement verifying the footage's authenticity and lack of tampering. This wasn't just evidence, it was a narrative in itself, a story that completely overwrote the one Mark was selling. When this file was handed over to the detectives at the Insurance Fraud Bureau, it ceased to be a simple workplace incident report. It became the cornerstone of a criminal case. The digital witness had not just seen the event, it had preserved the truth, an immutable record waiting in the shadows to step into the light of a courtroom and shatter a carefully constructed world of lies. The first official notification that his perfect world was crumbling came not as a dramatic knock on the door, but as a crisp, formal letter in the mail. It was from the insurance company, stating that his temporary disability benefits were suspended, pending a full investigation into discrepancies within his claim. The words were bureaucratic and dry, but they hit Mark with the force of a physical blow. The financial lifeline he had grown accustomed to was severed in an instant. Panic, cold and sharp, replaced the lingering guilt. This was followed by a call from his company's HR department, requesting a meeting to discuss the incident. Yeah, he knew. They knew. The walls were closing in. His wife, Sarah, found him sitting at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in his hand. When he told her, the genuine concern in her eyes slowly morphed into a dawning horror as the full implication of his deception settled upon her. She had been his nursemaid, his emotional rock, living in a state of constant worry for his health. Now she realized it was all a charade. "You used me," she whispered, the betrayal etching deep lines onto her face. The foundation of their marriage, already strained by the financial stress he had claimed to be solving, developed a fissure that felt irreparable. The house, once his sanctuary, became a place of silent accusation and crushing isolation. The legal net tightened with silent, inexorable efficiency. A subpoena arrived. He was ordered to provide a full deposition under oath. Sitting in a sterile conference room across from the coldly polite attorneys for the insurance company and his former employer, Mark had to repeat his story. But this time, every word was measured, every detail scrutinized. They asked him about the floor. They asked him about the pallet. They asked him repeatedly about the cameras. "Did you look at the camera before you fell, Mr. Dillard?" His lawyer objected, but the question hung in the air, poisoning it. He stuck to his script, his voice growing weaker, more desperate with each denial. He could feel their skepticism like a physical weight. They were not there to understand his accident. They were there to dissect his lie. Then came the final, pre-trial disclosure. A thick packet of documents from the prosecution. Inside, he found the private investigator's report. And there, printed on glossy paper, was a photo of himself, lifting the bag of soil, his face clear and untroubled by pain. It was a visual gut punch. This was no longer about a disputed claim. This was about being caught in the act. The fear of exposure was now a certainty. The performance was over. The only audience left was a judge, a jury, and the unblinking, impartial eye of the CCTV camera, waiting for its premiere in a courtroom. The legal machinery had him in its grip, and it was preparing to squeeze. The air in the courtroom was cold, sterile, and heavy with consequence. Mark sat beside his public defender, the cheap fabric of his suit scratching against skin that felt both numb and hypersensitive. Every breath echoed in the silent, wood-paneled room. He avoided looking at the public gallery, where his wife had chosen not to sit. His entire world had shrunk to this space, this moment. The prosecution's case was methodical, a slow, steady drumbeat of evidence leading to an inevitable conclusion. They called the maintenance supervisor, who confirmed no leak. They called Brenda, who detailed the inconsistencies that sparked the investigation. They called the private investigator, Roy, whose testimony was accompanied by the devastating, high-resolution photos of Mark's healthy, active double life. With each witness, the walls of the narrative Mark had built crumbled a little more. Then came the moment he had been dreading. The prosecutor, a woman with a calm, unwavering voice, approached the bench. "Your Honor, the state would like to enter Exhibit 12 into evidence." A large flat-screen monitor, positioned so that both the judge and the jury had a clear view, flickered to life. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was it. The digital witness was about to testify. The footage began to play in silence. Seeing the warehouse from that high angle, seeing his own tiny figure moving with such deliberate purpose, was surreal. He saw himself glance at the camera. He saw the calculated positioning of his body. From this vantage point, his fall didn't look like an accident at all. It looked like what it was: a deliberate, clumsy collapse. The prosecutor let the footage play twice. The second time, she added a simple, devastating narration. Notice the defendant's path. He walks past the area once. He looks directly at the camera. He positions his feet. There is no slip. There is no loss of balance. There is only a conscious decision to commit fraud. In the utter silence of the courtroom, the rustle of the jury foreman shifting in his seat was as loud as a gunshot. Mark could feel their eyes on him, could feel their collective judgment. The illusion was shattered. The performance, which had felt so convincing in the moment, was exposed as a transparent, pathetic sham under the cold, unflinching gaze of the truth. He had nowhere to hide. The camera had seen everything, and now so had the court. The damning footage was no longer just evidence. It was the final, unanswerable argument. The trial wasn't over, but the verdict was already written in the pixels on the screen. A heavy silence fell after the screen went dark. It was a silence that seemed to absorb all sound, all hope. All eyes in the courtroom turned from the damning monitor to the man in the epicenter of the storm, the judge. He was an older man, his face a roadmap of a career spent navigating the murky waters of human deceit and folly. Throughout the trial, his expression had been neutral, inscrutable. But now, as he slowly removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, a profound weariness seemed to settle upon him. It was not the weariness of boredom, but of deep disappointment. He had seen the footage. He had seen the careful choreography of the fall, the furtive glance at the camera, the entire pathetic pantomime. He had also seen the photos of the healthy man playing in his yard, a stark contrast to the broken soul described in the medical reports. The judge allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of the visual evidence press down on everyone in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, but it carried an authority that filled every corner of the chamber. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "The court," he began, "is presented with two competing realities." He methodically dismantled Mark's fabricated reality, piece by piece. He spoke of the maintenance logs, the investigator's testimony, and the profound, irrefutable evidence of the CCTV footage. "What we witnessed was not an accident," he stated, his gaze finally settling on Mark, who seemed to shrink in his seat. "It was a performance, a calculated act of deception designed to exploit a system built on trust, the trust between an employer and employee, and the trust that the public places in the integrity of the insurance system." He then spoke not just as an arbiter of law, but as a voice for the collective consequence of such acts. "Your fraud, Mr. Dillard, is not a victimless crime," he intoned. "It steals from your employer. It drives up premiums for every single honest business and hard-working citizen in this state. It casts a shadow of suspicion on every genuine injured worker who must fight for the benefits they rightfully deserve. You didn't just fake a fall. You eroded a small piece of the foundation of our societal contract." The words were measured, but they landed with the force of a gavel. He then pronounced the verdict: guilty of insurance fraud, a felony. The sentence followed: restitution of every dollar paid out, significant fines, and a period of incarceration. As the bailiff stepped forward, the finality of the moment crashed down. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen. The only role left for Mark to play was that of a convict. The judge's final act was not one of anger, but of grim, resolute justice, restoring balance by holding a mirror to the lie and shattering it. As the courtroom doors shut behind Mark Dillard, the echo wasn't just of a case closed, but of a life irrevocably broken. He entered that warehouse seeking a shortcut, a secret treasure he felt the world owed him. He left it a convicted felon, his reputation in tatters, his family fractured, his freedom forfeit. The money is gone, replaced by a debt he may never fully repay. The respect of his peers is a memory. The trust of his wife is a ghost that will haunt the empty spaces of his home. He thought he was staging a scene of victimhood, but the only true victim in the end was himself. consumed by the very deception he believed would set him free. The judge, in his solemn wisdom, did not just sentence a man to prison. He passed a judgment on the very nature of the act, highlighting the corrosive ripple effect of a single, selfish lie. The system, though slow and often impersonal, proved it has eyes. It watches, it records. And when pushed too far, it delivers a justice that is as cold, hard, and unyielding as the concrete floor Mark Dillard chose to fall on. So the next time you hear a story that seems a little too perfect, a tragedy that feels a little too convenient, remember the silent witness. Remember the unblinking eye in the rafters. And remember the judge, who waits, not with anger, but with the heavy, unwavering scales of justice. What would you have done in his shoes? Could you have spotted the lie before it was too late?